welcome to Over the Bonnet.
Okay, this is Over the Bonnet. Yeah, I've seen the Dodge. Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Okay, you're the most charged person in Queensland.
That's what the media put me down as, yeah. I have had a lot of charges.
What happened? What was the first one? Do you remember the first one that happened?
Well, they sort of, problems don't sort of come one at a time. They sort of come by battalions, you know. It all started probably some years before when the police commissioner wanted to stop my license for doing gun shows in Brisbane, and he sort of suspended, or thought he had, my license and for running the gun shows, and I appealed his determination in the magistrates court, and then it was found that I had my license. It hadn't been suspended. He had no right to stop me. I won $1,800 worth of compensation, court costs from him, and of course asked for it, sent letters, please pay, the court judgment, the date, and all that lot, and then they didn't pay, and so I then it was Jim O'Sullivan was the name of the police commissioner at the time.
Yes, it's
and then I went back to the magistrates court and asked for a direct court order that he had to pay the $1,800. And then in 14 days he still hadn't. So then I went to get back to the courthouse and got a warrant of execution. And then that meant I could go to the police and get goods to the value of the $1,800. But so anyway, I wrote to him again and said, look, I've got this, please pay, we don't want any fuss. And of course, still didn't get any answer. So then I went back to the court to get a warrant of commitment on the police commissioner. And as Magistrate Swan was getting a little bit sort of tired of the whole affair, he more than likely would have given it to me. That would have enabled me to go to the sheriff in Brisbane and ask the sheriff to arrest the police commissioner, you see. and so then I went to the courthouse, but it was when they saw the paperwork of what was going to transpire. The clerk of courts started running across to the police station, and they had basically got everybody's cash to give me the notes. And of course, it made it into the Courier Mail that that was what I'd done. And so there was, I did get my $1,800 then, but then not long after was the firearm compensation affair with the gun laws changing with John Howard in 1996, and we were supposed to get compensation for all of the parts and all of our stock that we gave back to them. The company that we had, Owen Guns, that it operated under, gave them about $11 million worth of parts. And of course, they paid everybody else, but they didn't pay us. And they paid, the first time they actually, sent us back and told us to collect the stuff, and they wouldn't take it at all. And then our lawyers got onto them, and then they agreed to take it, and then they didn't pay. So we took them to the federal court, and I filed on them on the Tuesday, and I filed a conspiracy to injure on the director of administration and his assistant, and then we put that in on, I think it was a Tuesday, and the Wednesday morning they came round to the shop to search and charge me, and I think that that was I think it was about 600 charges that day, and I think that would be the first group. And they continued doing that because they got, as my lawyers fought them off, and they had to be taken away because they weren't appropriate. Then they'd come back with another 500 or 600 or 466 one day, and then and eventually we had 2 jury trials, and the first one they were all chopped out again, and they had to start again and change the sections that they were going to charge me with, and then we had a 3.5 week jury trial, and in the district court, and the jury then said, it was not guilty, and so that was the end of that. But then they came back and charged me with another 600 or 700 under the Weapons Act.
Were you singled out?
Oh yeah. They actually so singled out that they brought witnesses to the court that had done exactly the same thing as what we'd been doing, you see. But they admitted in court that the detective, Darren Edwards, had been, the night I filed on the Tuesday, that night he'd been on overtime typing out all the charges till 11 o'clock that night. Like it was a specific effort, to counter our court case against them.
So why Owen Guns and not other gun shops or other gun
Basically
shops?
Because we weren't popular with the police commissioner because of that first. That's the point of me going through the the bit about the gun shows and the $1,800 costs. It put us at a pretty low esteem in the view of the Queensland police, and of course we were also singled out is because Naya Trading and Bill Naya and Robert Naya, they were running the buyback and they were our competitors, so that we were also singled out because they didn't want to give any compensation to their competitors.
How did it leave you feeling, the fact that you were sort of targeted this way?
Well, challenging. It was challenging. I was sort of probably used to it, I suppose. It's just, I accept it as a fact of life, I suppose.
You say used to it. What brought it on?
What brought what?
Why were you used to it?
Oh, well, my mother used to say I was born on a Friday, you see, and they have a little poem about, like, it's trouble, this troubled child, and I think I always had a bit of trouble. And I'm very lucky, that I get a lot of people who give me lots of support and ideas and aid, and but on the other hand, there's lots of people who get pretty upset with me. Yeah.
Is that because you do challenge the status quo?
Yeah, I do ask a lot of questions, yeah.
And that comes from you being, you've always done it since you were a child? Tell us about, let's go back to your childhood. Let's find out about what's created the Ron Owen that we have today.
How much time have you got? Yes, well, yeah, where would you want to start?
Just where you want to...
Yeah. As I was saying to your wife there, I was born in Manchester, Stretford, which was a very sort of like a street like the Rovers Return, Coronation Street type place, probably not as upmarket as that. And my formative years, were basically in the streets of Manchester, and then.
What was that like?
Oh, it was good. I mean, like, it's much worse in those areas now, but in them days it was everybody knew everybody's business. The families had lived in them houses for 100 years, since they were built in the 19th century, and all the ladies used to stone the steps, and the washing used to be across the street, and a doctor might visit the street, and everybody be talking because the doctor's car had been at number 19, and they'd had to take the washing down, and like if somebody died, the curtains would be closed, and at the coronation, the big street parties, and everything coloured streamers everywhere, and jelly and ice cream for the kids and sort of stuff. And that was not long after rationing stopped. And it was a very tight community. The young people couldn't really play up in them days because everybody knew everybody and knew what they were doing and where they were. And
what about yourself? Did you play up much?
No. I was more or less into, making things and guns and reading and stuff like that,
So the interesting guns.
Like my dad would tell me to go out, get outside and play in the street, but, because everybody, the kids used to play football in the street, where I was never keen on ball games. Yeah. It was very, very hard for me to get out and shoot and all that sort of stuff that I love doing, And probably that was what sent me. Well, I joined the small ball club, and when I was about 12, I joined the Army Cadets when I was 12, the 22nd Cheshire Regiment. Used to go on camps and go on shooting, and I shot at Bisley for the small ball club, in the juniors, And
Bisley, just for someone that doesn't know.
Bisley, it's the place where all the Queen's Prizes is, the shooting centre of Britain, where it was all the international Commonwealth Games sort of thing of Britain in shooting. Queen Victoria opened it, it's been there a long time. It used to be at Wimbledon, but they put those awful tennis courts there. And
So what actually got you into shooting in the first place? Obviously, if you're doing that at 12, what?
Oh, well, I can remember my mother taking me to the, like when I was knee-high to a grasshopper and saying, "Oh, look at that toy rifle. Do you want Father Christmas to buy it for you? Bring it to you for Christmas," sort of thing, And I said, "No, Mum, I want a real one." And I wanted to know how they worked and why they worked, and the power of being able to do something in one spot that changed something 500 meters away, even whether it was putting a hole through a piece of paper or shooting somebody's lunch. The thing is that it could transcend space, and move up on things, and I always found that fascinating.
Told your mum you wanted a real one. Which was your first gun then?
I suppose I had a few air rifles that were not very good, and then when I was about 13 or 14, I worked on a chicken farm, cleaning out chicken pens and turkey pens and all that lot for my school holidays, and got the money for my BSA air rifle, which I still have. It was a big event, and it's just an air rifle, but I sort of value it a lot.
Do you still take it out and shoot it?
No, not for some time. I take it out and clean it, and make sure it's okay. Yeah, it's safe.
So, what was it like when you first bought it, taking it out and shooting it for the first time?
Well, we were lucky then, because I'd moved out of Stretford to a place called Cheadle, and we used to be able to go and shoot at the tip and shoot rats and things like that, and that was really good. And then I used to practice in the garden constantly, shooting matchsticks and like learning to, teaching myself to shoot offhand. And I used to have a lot of good times with that, yeah.
So how far did you go with as a competitive shooter?
Oh, I think I was around about sixth in Great Britain in the around about 1961, and around about seventh in 62, and then I joined the army in 63.
So putting it all into practice when you joined the army, it must have been.
Oh, it was a come down, yeah.
Why was that?
Well, I, in the time from when I could read, from when I was about 7, I read everything about firearms. And when I was in the Army Cadets, shot the 303 and Bren guns and things like that. They were all still in the 303 era. Whereas when I joined the regular army in 1963, that was all 308s and the SLR, and was the rifle of the day, the service rifle. But the army was probably more concerned in having a bayonet on the end of it and having bayonet practice rather than shooting practice. And in comparison with competitive shooting, the army was very, very far behind. I was soon in the Grenadier Guards rifle team at Pirbright, which was the camp next to Bisley, so that we could compete. And they kept me there for much longer than they should, so that all the inter-regimental shoots, I was on the team. And then we did have competitions against the civilian people, and it was very difficult for the army teams to even compete against the civilian teams.
You'd think it would be the other way around.
Well, the civilian teams got more practice and had much better equipment, and it was it was very difficult, and they were more interested. It was very, very difficult. I mean, the NCO in charge of the team couldn't understand which way to move the front sight on the SLR to apply windage. And he basically kept me there in the armourer's shop because I could adjust the sights on the SLR. He didn't want me to leave because he didn't know how to do it. And I should have gone to battalion, but he kept transferring me back.
Did you think of moving into sort of like a marksman with the army, or sharpshooter or sniper? And
I was already beyond that. Like I was in the regiment. I was in the top. I was at the top of the top 6 that shot for the regiment. Like the sniper and marksman badges were so easy. They're not. There was not much challenge in that area, and it's the army has a different view. Like it's like I can remember one of the instructors when I was in recruits. He says, and this is the 7.62 NATO round. It's a 308. It's the fastest, bullet in the world. Even that is a misnomer. And I'd say, Sergeant, is a 220 Swift. It does 4,000 feet per second, and it's a much faster cartridge than that, Sergeant. And he would scream at me and tell me to run round the parade ground with a rifle above my head until he got tired. Yeah, and I mean the person who like I was in another NCO did a lecture on the Bren gun, and he knew the manual on the Bren gun, right, the word by rote. But if anybody interrupted him, he had to start again at the beginning, and he had no comprehension really of how it worked and what the gas system actually did and how it got its energy. No comprehension at all, but he knew it by rote, and that's very good. And they taught people to do it by rote, and they didn't have to be well educated to get past that particular standard.
Was it a frustrating time then in the army, the entire time?
No. I tried to get away for different courses to get away from Pirbright. See, Pirbright was the guards depot. Training depots is where you've got all your intakes coming into, and then that feeds the battalions. And I was relegated to the training battalion at Pirbright. But there was nowhere for anybody to hide at Pirbright. Pirbright was like a continuous screaming, of NCOs at rookies and sort of thing, And I always wanted to get to the battalion, and I couldn't. But so I would apply. I did a mounting course in North Wales at Tywyn twice, and did a Halo course, which is high altitude, low opening thing. But I did the 12 weeks fitness course, running around with telegraph poles and ropes and all this sort of stuff, and then got told I was too tall and too heavy, so I couldn't go further with the course anyway. And so that was back to Pirbright again, and that continued. And so when my option came up to get out, to go back into civilian life, I took the option, which was in 1967.
How did you find the transition?
Not easy. It's like when you're so used to, like when your mother asks you what you want for dinner, and I still suffer from that, because you have to think about what you want for your dinner, whereas it's generally just thrown at you in ration packs and things like that, or at the mess. And so those things, that institutionalization that you get used to, it stays with you a long time.
So once you did leave the army, what happened after that?
I first of all applied. I went to Canada House. I got a job, like in engineering, and it was not very little money and just around local. And then I went to Canada House to see about going to Canada, but they wanted £270, was the thing, to fill out all the forms and to emigrate to Canada.
Why Canada?
I just thought there was a lot of open space and I could get a lot of shooting in, And so that was definitely beyond me. So then I went to Australia House, and it was in Manchester, and they said, that's good, but there's not many people your age group and boys going there at the moment. The girls are going, but the boys aren't. And I said, why not? And they said, there's national service over there. You see, as soon as you get there, you're eligible for national service as soon as you arrive. Oh, right. And I said, that's okay. That's a job straight away, because we trained Australian soldiers, and they used to get paid more than us, and they used to get paid extra for eating our rations. So I thought that's pretty good, and they were pretty good guys. So I thought, Australia sounds fine to me, and if the army wants me, 2 years is nothing, So and then I didn't have £10 actually on me to pay the £10 POM type thing, and so they had to whip round the office, and that's how I got here.
Wow. could have been Canada, but for 270.
Yeah, but so I basically came for free, and when I arrived in Melbourne, I had a £5 note, and I converted that to $10, and.
So, what were your thoughts once you arrived here? What was the plan?
Oh, the plan. Well, first thing was to get a job. They put me in. I went first of all to the Army recruiting office in Elizabeth Street in Melbourne, and they said, "Oh no, well, we don't want you. Yeah, you're eligible, but it's don't call us, we'll call you," type of thing, And I said, "Oh, okay then." And I said, "Do you know where I could stay?" And they said, "Oh, well, there's an extra army camp at Fisherman's Bend down near the docks." And so I stayed in a Nissen hut there until I got a flat, and then I worked at Mittens in the tool room, and we're making tools, for making knives and forks and sinks and baths and beer barrels and things like that. And then they said, "Oh well, you're here now. You'll go into the next ballot thing." And so I was really
for Mashos.
Yeah. And so I was 20, I think, or 21, but it was still within the period. So anyway, my birthday got called out, so I thought, oh, well, that's it, I'm in, and then I filled out all the forms, and then I got a letter back from them and says, as soon as you're still in the reserve for the British Army, we can't take you. And you see, because I was still in the reserve of the British Army until I was 60.
Oh, wow.
Under the Defence Act, yeah. But the Australian Army can do that, but they take,
They've called you back if they'd needed you?
Oh, yeah. And if I hadn't have had a good excuse. But the Australian Army can do it, but then they got to do a lot more paperwork to get the other army out of the picture, which is if somebody transfers over from the Brit Army to the Australian Army, that's the proper way to do it, and that would have worked out, but it just didn't work out for me.
So then what happened next?
Well, I actually finished an apprenticeship at Mittens, and then I worked at John's Hydraulics for a few months. Then I went to work for the Social Welfare Department of Victoria as like a youth officer, prison guard type thing, and I was there doing that until 1974.
And you met some pretty interesting people during that time.
Oh well, there was lots of people coming in and out, and have you got specifically anybody in mind?
Well, as I say, let's run through a couple of the highlights or lowlights.
Lowlights, definitely lowlights. Well, some of the staff were really highlights. I'm still, very friendly with some of the guys that are still alive from that time. But some of the lowlights, like Chopper Reed and Loughman and a few of the others were have had disastrous, careers since then.
You talk about the sort of like people like Chopper Reed. Once they were incarcerated, how did they change? How was managing sort of the more notorious criminals?
Oh well, I think he was put in this is from my memory. He was put in there for doing things to little girls that he shouldn't have done, yeah. And he would have been about 18 at that time, and he was in J Division. And then the psychiatrists and the medical people had been at him and another one, I think it is Loffman, and for the same reasons, and they got them on these hormone tablets, and that was supposed to keep them with a mind change, not so interested in little girls.
Did it work?
Well, I wouldn't be qualified to say that. I mean, and as there were no girls at all in Pentridge at the time, it was. Later on, they did bring some women prison officers in there, and that was bloody a debacle. But the psychiatrists had got them on these hormone tablets, you see, and they grew boobs, you see. And of course, the other prisoners thought that was fantastic, and whereas you hear about some prisons where they don't like child pedophiles and so forth, and they get a hard time. They were very popular, and with the inmates at the time.
Why is that?
Because they had boobs.
Oh, right, okay,
Yeah.
just for that reason.
Yeah, like it's. I'm not saying that all of the prisoners were like that at all, but it seemed to be a large percentage were that way inclined.
How did it affect you dealing with that sort of person day in, day out?
Well, a lot of the staff used to have, like drink a lot or take Valium pills or stuff like that. But I suppose that because of my early life in the army, you sort of sense of humour, and you sort of it didn't really. And I suppose you don't sort of see it on a human basis as it, is what you do. I suppose doctors and nurses have the same sort of thing, like you build a wall in your mind, and that's them and this is us, and you just, that's how you handle it, I think.
What about, though, a situation, did you ever find yourself in situations that you thought, oh crap, I'm in trouble here?
Oh, sometimes there was a lot of violence, but I was always very well equipped for that. There's also because of the intellectual advantage, even when they're very outnumbered, they really couldn't get it together to do much. I never felt really insecure, and I worked in H division and the psychiatric ward as well. I used to like that place better than than J division actually.
Tell us about J division.
J was a junior, 18 to 21. That was actually probably the most violent division.
Really?
Yeah, because they've got a lot of vim and vigor at that time. When you get H, you get lots of murderers and everything, but they're long-term prisoners, and then the general prison division is a hierarchical situation. Like there was a Jewish prisoner that used to do the tax returns for all the warders, and and I used to probably oppose the kingpins mainly, because there's a hierarchical structure, of run on violence through what everybody does and what job everybody gets. And when I was there in Victoria at that time, the pommy British Crim that used to run the place, I think that would be different now, that they would be more cosmopolitan, but there used to be a lot of Aboriginals in there as well. They used to fill up during the winter because they wanted somewhere warm to stay, you know. But yeah, I used to like it because I could get away hunting. I could work 7-day shifts and get 7 days off, and then I went and run an outward bound division that was at Buxton in the mountains, and we used to take 20 prisoners, you know, for a week or 2 weeks. And
is this minimum security?
Yeah, just before their release, you know, so that they had, you know, they had no compunction to run off because they only had, you know, like weeks to go. And I used to organise map reading and fishing and sort of camping type things with them. Yeah.
How did they react to that after being institutionalised for a stretch in prison?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I never in probably 2 years, I never lost one. None of them disappeared on me or anything like that. Well, one disappeared once and then came back. And he'd stolen my wallet as well, so I was glad he came back. But it was good. We had a lot of fun. If any time that the battery was flat or anything, they always get the car starting, you know, because they're good at stealing cars. or if you lost the key. Yeah, it was quite good. Yeah.
Okay, so as you say, just doing private hunting as well at the time, going
yeah, chasing deer, yeah,
shooting?
Competitive shooting, yeah.
So what about the move to Queensland then? What brought you up to the Sunshine State?
Well, I moved to East Gippsland first, and my parents can come out. They basically folded me to Australia in a way. We caught up a bit on the way, but they bought a general store in a place called Bonnet in East Gippsland, and they found that they couldn't run it themselves and they needed somebody to come and help them. And so there was probably more work than what they could do, but probably not enough, you know, for me as well, you know. So when we moved to the store, or they, you know, and I came back to Melbourne, then resigned from the social welfare department, and then I moved back up there. I then started selling firearms and got a firearm dealer's license, and expanded that area of the general store. That's where Owen Guns started, and I was the president of the local rifle club, and yeah, got a lot of shooting there, and I earned extra money shooting rabbits for the chillers, hundreds of rabbits every night, and we'd take them to the chillers in the morning, and then roo skins, thousands and thousands of roos. The skins, you know, went to the skin buyers, and all of that helped me get the capital to, you know, put into buying guns and ammunition.
Which animal was your favourite when you're out chasing?
I don't think it was any sort of favourite. I mean, rabbits have to be shot, and I do think it's a lot more humane to shoot them there rather than to poison them, and that's the only other alternative. Kangaroos, they have to be shot, and if they didn't get shot, the farmers would have definitely poisoned them as well. It's sad. It has to happen, but we had to maximise as much, financial for the work that was involved, so as well as at the same time as I was a qualified fitter and turner, I also began rebarreling firearms and fitting triggers, importing triggers, and importing guns, importing gun parts, And then my parents decided to sell the store and move to Queensland, and so I decided to move Owen Guns from there to Queensland. And so I drove my Nissan Patrol with the caravan, and mum and dad, and they had their own car and everything, 3 dogs, and we came went as far as Maryborough, and Maryborough looked very straight and didn't look like it had the same sort of character as what Gympie had. So I came back to Gympie and found a shop and opened Owen Guns within a fortnight.
It's continued to grow. Are you surprised with the way the shop's grown over the years?
Oh, well, not surprised so much. I mean, the first few years it grew much quicker, but then the legislation and the court cases and the continual sort of oppression by the Queensland police really put us back a lot of years, behind. Like at one time in 1996, we had 5 shops and we had an importing business, and where you see us today was our wholesale warehouse, and that was full of guns that we would be wholesaling to other shops. And after 1996 and the not getting the compensation from the buyback, which all of our competitors got millions out of, it put us way down, the heap really. But Gympie's always been a good shooting town, and it's been very good for me, loyal to us, and we always wanted to put things back for Gympie, really.
You talk about that buyback scheme, the whole Martin Bryant situation. What do you think about what they did, what John Howard did with the whole taking control of the gun industry?
Well, I was sort of lucky in a way, I was very interested in, because I'd suffered in Britain with gun laws and how the oppression, and impositions that are put on people for no logical reason. And of course, I was involved in the opposing gun laws. I was half owner of Lock, Stock and Barrel shooting magazine, and wrote countless articles, about it. So I was well informed and prophesied, I suppose, what was going to occur. And when John Howard was elected and signed letters to the Sport and Shooters Association promising that he would reform and fix up the previous oppressions, I was fully aware that that wouldn't be the case, that that wouldn't be the truth of the matter. And so when he did his worst and started to work unconstitutionally by bullying the states to do what he wanted,
So he had an agenda before.
Oh, I'm sure he did. Yeah, and the guy who orchestrated it was a guy called Darrell Smeaton. He worked at the Attorney General's Department, and he went to the Cairo conference in Egypt in the would it be 1995 or 1994, and he came back with the 23 points that we had imposed on us, and I knew that he had them there, and I'd had a few conversations with him to try and get copies of it, and I finally did get a copy of it not long before John Howard, then the gun laws came in. And so that basically they could then sign the civilian disarmament treaty, which was what the aim of that UN meeting was there. And at that meeting was Rebecca Piepers, who was working at that time for one of the Soros trusts, and like probably a few other people as well. She's involved with the UN now. She was, if you remember, she was over here, an American lady that was anti-gun control Australia, or gun control Australia, was it? And she's gone back there. She works for George Soros in the UN now. And so I knew that was the agenda and what they would be pushing to bring in.
Why do you think John Howard had that push to basically de-gun the population?
Well, I think he's sort of got a very, sort of like a person who's got a chip on their shoulder, or they've got their own personal feeling of insignificance, and they don't want power in anybody else's hands, or some sort of phobia. I think there's a word for it. I think it's called something like hoplophobia, and that would probably be what he's suffering from.
Is it important to have guns in the community?
Oh, well, yeah. It's you can't really, once somebody invents, a tool, the tools, within human knowledge, you can't really say, well, we'll take a community and take every one of those tools out of it. I mean, they might try these days to send the information down the memory hole, like from 1984, but it's very difficult. And so, is it fair for some people to have them and some people to not have them? Some people might want them and some people might not want them. But if you say only these people shall have them and those people won't, there is a certain problem with society when it does that.
Is the licensing that we have too regimented?
Well, it's illogical and useless. It's a waste of human endeavour. I mean, bad people can get whatever they like, whenever they like. And so it's really puts an imposition on the people who want them for their personal security, their home security, want them for their business security, who may want them for eradicating pests on their property or for putting humane, and they put their stock down, or they may want them for competition, or they might be collectors, and they've got a human right to fulfill those needs. And
have they got it right in the States where I think it's the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms?
Well, I do think that is right, but it's not just right there; it's right here too, because we have the Bill of Rights of 1689, and which says that it says in one part of it, all the Catholics are armed, and the Catholics should not disarm the Protestants. And then it goes on further to say that all Protestants, good people basically, should have arms suitable for their defence, and it's a human right, and it's a long-established human right, but way back from Magna Carta or the Bible, it's for people to come along and say we want to make one section of the community powerless and the other section of the community in power, with power, that's always a problem. There's no good solutions that have worked that way.
How would you like to see the system changed? What would you like to see in place?
Well, I think that for starters, if we could keep the people that deserve to be in jail, and it would be a lot safer community. And so that would allow us to say, well, if people, citizens have we trust them with a 2-ton projectile to drive a car. If they got their driver's license, they can certainly buy a firearm and use it for their own purposes. I don't think there should be anything more than that. And if there is a person that's out there that's got a mental problem, a prohibited person, these days it's very easy to give and the gun shops are where all the licensing is done. The Queensland Police and all the police forces behind it that are supposed to compile the information that comes from the gun shops, they're 2 or 3 years behind anyway, and so very often a third of the information that they process is wrong, and so any register or keeping of the information is totally unreliable anyway. So they should just leave it with the registration of the firearm at the gun shop, whose records are there for 15 years that they have to keep them. And so if there's anything that needs to be tried to be tracked down, the information is at least there available for them. But other than that, I don't think that there's anything else that needs to be there.
What do you think can happen, though, in the next, say, 5-10 years as far as gun control?
Well, I think that the police forces in Australia, for instance, are finding it to be a nightmare, because there's a 35% increase of people wanting to get licenses every year, and it's a compact, and there's only people that are dying off, which is maybe 5 or 10%, so you got a 25% increase every year, and especially this year has been enormous, and they just can't keep up. So it's all going to fall in a heap for them anyway. They bought a computer for about 25 million some years ago, and then Canada got rid of their system, and so they can't get the updates, for it. And it's the same computer that messed up the wages for the health department. It's just a mess, and nobody can get them on the phone. They can't get anything corrected. They've built their own nightmare, and so I can't see them doing much further than that. They did say that there'd be another amnesty this year, where people can, hand in stuff easily, and we can put them on their licenses for them. But it might be cancelled because of the disease year, but there is an ordinary amnesty anyway. People take them into the gun shop, they book them in. There's no ramifications anyway, but we can't put them onto their license with a form, which we can do during an amnesty period, which they could make all the time. Then they wouldn't have to bother with this permit to acquire rubbish that they impose on everybody and the $40 fee.
And is it just revenue, the permit to acquire?
Yeah, it's just revenue. Yeah, jobs for the boys, create more jobs. There's no purpose for it because all the registration's done. The police commissioner's registers completed by the gun shops anyway. It's just ridiculous.
So is it something that you think police want?
The ordinary policeman, it's a nightmare for them as well, especially with their own firearms. And when they got people turning up at the police station who want any queries, and they have to try and deal with weapons licensing, they throw their hands up in the air and send them to the gun shop because they just can't cope with it.
You say that only the bad people can get whatever they want.
Whenever they want.
So how do they get them?
Well, lots of them come in parts. Lots of them are manufactured, lots imported within car parts and washing machines and
Really?
Yeah.
Gee whiz, you wouldn't think about something like that, I suppose.
Well, there's no shortage for them, and they're getting used to it. And actually, some of their firearms are cheaper, and also the police lose them. And they have, like, New South Wales Police lost 1,200 at once. And then there's Vi Cummings in the Canberra Times wrote an article about the Defence Department losing 5,000. So, there's little point in making us suffer.
Well, there is little point. So, what is the point? Why are they making us still suffer?
They've got, I think as I said, with John Howard and people like that, they have some sort of fear or hoplophobia about firearms, and they have armed guards themselves. They don't mind them at all, but they don't like the idea that the population has got that power. I mean, it's the same when the Germans took France or Jersey, and they got their own police to disarm the population, and that's the same sort of thing in a way, isn't it? I'm not suggesting that that they've got some agenda the same way that the Nazis had, but that's the reason why the Second Amendment is there, is for people to be able to defend themselves against anything like that. And that was why the Bill of Rights was put there in 1689, because some of the haves, population, were trying to take them from the have-nots, and that's the reason for those laws. And but this all in a flux of change. Like what's happening in the world at the present time is definitely, we're in a state of change. We've got people who want to destroy, orchestrated destruction of the Western civilization, and they're about, with all these rioters and this some lives matter but some lives don't, idea. They're well paid, organisers. The bricks get left in the right places. The shops, they all phone one another up when they're looting. It's all well organised. And
I did read somewhere that they were talking that police did distribute some of the blocks.
Right.
And then they could go in and use it as an excuse to break up the riots.
Oh, that's a novel one. I've not heard that one yet. But it's very difficult to see where the truth is. But you just have to look at the opposites, don't you? Like if you didn't have prisons, for incarceration, well, what you do, you go back to the old slavery days, and they oppose that as well, So, like in the biblical times, if somebody stole an item, they had to pay it back 7 times, and if they couldn't, they were enslaved for 7 years. And if they ran off, then they were executed. All of that, like the prison system and the police system, are all cuddly, soft alternatives to the fact that what it is when society doesn't have them. I mean, nobody's got probably more argument, or had more disagreements with the police than me. But you have to say that they're an important part of society, and it keeps the norms there. They don't really have to be in front of every shop to stop them being looted, but their presence and their formation, I think Robert Peel's idea was very good, and though it's probably got a little bit more militant in the last few years than what his intent was, And then if you look at prisons, and if you think, well, if there's no prisons and no prison warders and all that lot, well, you've only got the alternative of enslaving or capital punishment, and I'm sure that they wouldn't like that alternative. And if there is no police, well, then the only alternative for that is for vigilantes, like the people who would want to protect their shops.
Because there's no guns on the streets, essentially, do you think that we could end up with a US-style riot looting sort of problem here? Because they're already starting with the demonstrations.
The people who are orchestrating this are not just trying to do it in the States. They're planning and organising this in every Western country, from Britain, Europe, and Australia, and they will, like Open Society, which is funds Get Up and all of these structures and funds, Gun Control Australia, are all funded. George Soros gave them 18 billion last year, and then it's sort of where he gets his money from is probably the Chinese Communist Party or somebody who is funding him, and that filters down to cause civil unrest in the Western world. And that is, to me, it's very obvious. That's what the cause is. It's funny too. Like they seem to be anti-slavery, yet one of the big beneficiaries of George Soros's money is the Democrat Party, and the founder of the Democrat Party was Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner that had children with his slaves, and he founded the Democrat Party. It's sort of, and then it's crazy, isn't it, the way that these rioters want to attack the statue of Winston Churchill, and they call him a racist. But what about the other guy, the guy that Winston Churchill was opposing? He was a racist, and Winston Churchill actually opposed it. And then they're even picking on Queen Victoria now at the moment, and she was one of the ardent anti-slavers, and had the whole British Army and the British government and sending General Gordon off to Khartoum to stop slavery. And they've sort of lost the plot, really. But I don't suppose we should look for logic, because there isn't any, and it's really just a movement to destroy Western civilization. And if they do, they probably won't like the outcome of that either.
Who's the beneficiary out of all of this? The Chinese?
Well, they seem to be the ones who have been benefiting greatly from this in the past, and they have. Even with the COVID-19, even though they lost, probably still are losing millions of people in China, the Communist Party, their leadership doesn't mind at all, because they're not short of people, and so they will be the beneficiaries, because they've got all the factories and all the tools and all the markets sewn up, and they can treat Australia with total disdain.
You think that with this whole COVID situation that it's going to bring, as you say, well, your shop's been quite busy over the whole COVID situation. Do you think it's going to put pressure on governments and institutions to bring to rearm the population?
I don't see it working that way. I think it'd be the reverse of that. And we've already had, when the COVID-19 lockdown, so-called came on, one of the first moves from the state government was to try and close the gun shops for no good reason at all. There's very little difference between buying a tool at Bunnings or buying one at Owen Guns or any other gun shop. But they really did have a good try at locking them down. But the thing is that it will be the resistance from the people themselves, the fear that's caused by the looters and rioters and so forth, these idiots, is what will fuel and make the government change its mind. That will be the catalyst. And, like the looters and the rioters and these idiots will be, as usual, fueling their own downfall.
How do you think it'll play out?
Well, look, I'm not writing off the idea that there might be in some countries a civil war, but
in the States,
well, it might not be general. It might be on a state basis, but there is already areas of Seattle that they've captured and made into no-go areas, and when you've got the Los Angeles local government giving Black Lives Matter $250 million and defunding its police force, it's obviously that there's going to be problems there, but humongous problems. And like when there was the big riots in the 1980s or 1990s in Hollywood, and Jack Nicholson and lots of actors were ran round to Charlton Heston's house to try and get a firearm so they could defend their mansions. I think that that sort of changed people's minds. And even when the disease was starting in the States, and in March, 150 million new firearms were sold in the USA. Apparently a large percentage of them were democratic, sort of liberal people who had never had firearms before, and that insecurity pushes the manufacturer of firearms.
Okay, let's come back to home, and that there's a book that you've written. Tell us about that. The range.
The Range Officer's Handbook.
Yeah.
Oh, that's I wrote that. It took me 6 years to write it. To basically, because the older members of the clubs were, who were the range officers since the days when the ranges were all run under the Defence Act, and the club secretary could call out the militia, and that's what all the club members were. We used to pay an extra $1 to the National Rifle Association, and we had to take the oath, as to defend Australia, and we could be called out by the club captain. Well, all of those club captains were dying off, the Tommy Millers, and who did it for years. All that information that they had. Australians don't sort of take heed, or not easily controlled by sort of badges or awards or rank. They are much more influenced by knowledge, and they'll conform with the rules when they know that it's a logical reason, and that the people who are in charge have got that knowledge that they respect. They respect the knowledge, I suppose. So I put the book together to give as much knowledge as a general knowledge about firearms and the competitive shooting and firearm safety and cleaning and a whole range of subjects. I think there's about 500 and odd pages of it, and that's why I did that. And
what sort of person is interested in looking at that sort of information?
Well, Well, varied, really. Like there's thousands of them have been sold, and doctors, well, even the police have bought it and put that in their libraries, technical library, and they've it's in the Defence Academy and the library and the Federal Police. And I know one of the Federal policemen in Canberra, he has one on his desk with my name on it, so that people walk past and see Ron Owen's name on his desk, they get the message.
What's the message?
The message, well, he obviously thinks that Ron Owen's a pretty good bloke, and my name would be unpopular in some areas.
So, still competitive shooting these days?
A bit of a holiday because of this disease, and I usually shoot bench rest on a Wednesday night, and I've not been able to go.
Favourite weapon?
Well, I never think of them as that. I think of them as firearms, or air rifles. I don't sort of think of them as weapons. Weapons, to me, I think of an axe or a sword or something that you chop up things
Okay,
with.
then I'll rephrase. Favourite firearm?
Yeah, favourite. 6.5 Swedish Mauser. I like them. I like Bren guns. Yeah, like SLRs. Still got one on the wall in the museum. Yeah.
Tell us about the museum. It's something that you're pretty passionate about.
Oh, well, yeah. I've always been collecting firearms and accessories and stuff, and and I thought that what was needed was to put a display of firearms up as not just a military museum, and not just but a museum that showed all of the inventions and the creativity that people have had to do to put to get the patents approved and get their firearm into production, and how many inventions there are. And then as I started to build it and we started to do the displays, I also got the idea that what we were doing was normalising firearm ownership, not showing that it's a legal pursuit, but showing that it's normal for people to collect firearms and to people to display them. And
I remember there was a classic photo of Bob Catter seated in his lounge room with 3 rifles up on a rack behind him. This is well before the buyback, and as you say, usually just displayed.
Yeah, the media made a lot of that. Bob has been to see the museum, and yeah, quite a lot of people have been, politicians have been to see it. Not John Howard. We haven't had John Howard yet.
Funny that. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Yeah, easy.
And I look forward to hopefully catching up again.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing what you do with it. Anyway,
Cheers.
Okay.